I'm always a bit nervous whenever I do a video and use the term zero waste, because you do tend to invite people to look at your stuff, and then there's always someone who looks at you and says, oh, this isn't zero waste. So I don't like using that term, so I'm not going to use that term because I don't consider myself a zero waster. I just don't like wasting stuff. And I also have a real bone to pick with plastic. Excessive use of plastic, I would like to clarify. Some people have a real plastic phobia, and no, it's an amazing material, but it's severely overused and massively wasted, and that annoys me. But today what I wanted to do is talk more about the kind of things that I've upcycled. So stuff which was one thing and I turned it into something else, and maybe you'll find some inspiration from it, but for me this is something that I really enjoy. I love whenever I'm buying anything, doesn't matter what it is, doesn't matter if it's food, doesn't matter if it's olive oil, doesn't matter. I will look at it, look at the container that it comes in and think, can I use that and turn it into something else? I find it very fun. It's the kind of thing I could turn into a game and do it for hours. So today I wanted to do a video all about my favourite upcycles, what they originally were and what I turned them into. This one I bought just because I loved the container. I'd seen it in Tesco's, I was looking at it for months and months, I kept walking past it and thinking, oh, that looks beautiful, I love the texture, but I couldn't think of what I could use it for. And in the end I figured out it would fit really nicely underneath one of the little Himalayan salt lamps that we had, and this was a salt lamp that we had in my son's room, and I really like salt lamps for having in little one's rooms because it gives you just enough light to be able to see what's going on, but it isn't that blue light that wakes you up. So he could wake up in the middle of the night, I'd go in and feed him, go back to bed, and I wouldn't be awake because it wasn't like I'd turned the main light on and that blue light had completely woken you up. It kept him calm because he could still see what was going on in the room, I could see what was going on in the room, but it didn't wake everyone up, and it's just a lovely, really ambient effect. It's a very similar light to firelight, and that's why I like it. But the problem is that when we moved in, this house had 101 damp issues. We didn't know that there was a great big hole in the roof. We also didn't know that there was water coming in through the walls because it needed to be repointed. These are all things we found out eventually, but one of the things that salt lamps aren't great for is absorbing moisture. If there's a lot of moisture around them, they are going to sweat like something crazy, and you end up with these salt puddles around. The salt lamp, which if it's on a wooden surface is going to trash them, which is exactly what happened. So I needed something that I could just pop a little bit of an absorbent material inside, pop the salt lamp in, and then protect whatever the salt lamp was on from the salt. So I ended up buying this, and as it is, in the end, that salt lamp broke, so I didn't need it anymore, but I didn't want to chuck it away because I was sure I could use it. And now it's the absolute perfect thing for all our coasters. So I've reused that. I'm going to be making some more coasters this week, but I got these really nice little hammered bronze coasters. I love them, they're just a lovely colour. I also like that they're metal, so the little one can throw them across the room as much as he wants. They are never going to break. And all the coasters just slot really nicely in there, and they don't float around the room. I know that if I want a coaster, it's up there on the shelf and I can get it, and it's just still makes me happy. I love the colour, I love the texture of it, and I also like that I got to reuse something. That just makes me happy, so that's my first favourite. The next thing are the jars that I use for my herb jars currently. One of the shops that we have close to us, what's it called, Pound Stretcher, sells Himalayan salt. So I like to buy it for sea salt, but also because the bottles are really good as herb bottles. So what I've been doing over the last year and a half since I've started buying this is that as soon as I'm done with a bottle, I will then use that for one of my herbs. So at the moment I've got thyme, oregano, eventually I will have chives. These are all plants that I have growing in the garden, but I don't yet have the bottles. So every time I finish a bottle, I get to add a herb to my herb shelf. I've got chili flakes, I've got, what else is it, peppers. And I like that I can see them, that they're all stacked out, and then because they have the cork tops, I can just write on the top what's inside, and it just looks beautiful, and it's something that I got to reuse, and I didn't have to pay for a whole load of fancy spice bottles because these do the job beautifully, so I love them. This is something I've been saving up for a fair while. You know, normally when you get a package through the mail, if you buy a new pair of shoes, or if you buy a bag or a coat, or even some toys, and they'll come with those little silica gel packets. I save those because I dehydrate a lot of food. I dehydrate a ton of apples every year to make apple crisps. Now that we have the polytunnel, we've started dehydrating tomatoes. Well, there's something else that I wanted to dehydrate. Oh, SCOBY fruit rolls are also really nice. So those little silica gel packets are really, really handy. So normally what I'll do is every time I see one, I'll just pop them in the jar. I have a jar of them in the pantry, and every single time I need them, I can just take a bundle of them, pop them in whatever jar I'm storing that food. And it's a useful little thing that I think a lot of people just throw out because they don't realize how useful they are. But even if you don't use them for food, sometimes they're useful just for keeping in shoes. If you have a pair of shoes that just don't smell that great, just get a load of silica gel, put them in a pair of socks, pop that inside the shoes, and it will massively help with any kind of weird funky smells. So they're just really useful. I could honestly do a video all about the uses of silica gel, but for just today, I'm going to say those are one of the things that I reuse a lot. I reuse them a lot for food, just to make sure that if I haven't dehydrated something perfectly, that it's not going to spoil and make the whole jar go off. So those are things that every time I see one, I save them and I try and reuse them. This is something I reuse. I reuse the bread bags that I have, but I don't reuse the bread bags that my husband has. For the moment, I haven't quite managed to get to the stage where I'm doing sourdough. I used to make homemade bread the first year we were married, and then I got really sick and that all fell off a cliff. What I want to do this time around is I really want to get my head around sourdough. So eventually I'm hoping not to even have any gluten, any of the normal plastic food bags for bread. But for myself, if I get bread, I need to get the gluten-free stuff, and that comes in a bag, so I'll reuse those. And they're really, really useful because if I dehydrate apple crisps, I can store a massive amount of apple crisps in there. And because I know that it's never had any gluten, I don't have to worry that I haven't washed the bag perfectly and that there'll be a little bit of gluten in there that I could then eat. So I save all of those. They're so useful as sandwich bags, for putting dried food in, just anything like that. Or if I want to make some soups and I want to have the veggies all pre-cut, really nice and easy until I get my hands on some bone broth. Sometimes if I have veggies and I see, I'm not going to get to those in time, I'll cut them up into little cubes, pop them in those bags, pop them in the freezer drawer, and then once I have a good amount of bone broth, I can just put that all in, reuse the bag, and it's just another thing that doesn't have to get thrown away. The first year we got married, we didn't have a normal bed, we had a futon, which worked. But over the years, that futon has been turned into 101 different things around this house. It got taken apart because it was just a really good little pine futon, but it got to a point where we didn't need it anymore. So we took it apart. The parts that we didn't need just got burned in the wood stove, but there were a lot of really nice long boards. So I've turned this into loads of projects around the house. I used it to make a nappy shelf. Recently that nappy shelf got turned into another shelf because we no longer needed the nappy shelf. I prefer having the cloth nappies now just in a basket. It's a little bit easier. Well, I've turned it into a lot of shelving. I don't always have video footage of all of this, but at one point I made a shelf in the pantry for all the cardboard and the paper that came through the door. We used that as kindling for the stove, so that was just holding it up and out of the way. Eventually, over the next few weeks, I want to try and make kind of like on the grey couch that we have, I want to try and make a little, I guess, a tea coaster. I don't quite know how to describe this, but what I want to do is make kind of like a wooden thing that slots over the end of the armrest, so that when you're sat down, you can put your tea down on it. At the moment you can't because it's fabric and it's also a bit wobbly and it's kind of slightly arched as well, so if you put a tea on it, it's a little bit risky, especially if the little one is bouncing on the couch. So what I want to do is make this little wooden part that just slots over it, and I'm going to be using that to go over it, and then I might do some nice kind of Viking carvings on it and put a little brass inlay onto it. I don't know, but I have turned that futon into so many things. That's easily one of the most repurposed, reused things that I've done so far, and it's still getting used for stuff, so yeah. As much as we don't use that futon, I still love it. One of the systems that we have as well for kind of budgeting and stuff like that, because I'm a visual learner, I find that one of the best ways to make sure that I don't go over every month, because I don't like using cards, it's too easy because you don't hand anything over. You hand the card over, you pay for something, and then you get given the card back. So in your head, you don't feel like you've exchanged money for something else. It's just too easy to feel like, I just handed someone a card and I got stuff. At least that's what I find with me. So I find that for me, having actual physical cash is a lot better because I see it and I think, oh, I've only got 15 quid left to do the food shopping for the week or whatever. So what we do is, one of the systems we have is jars, And I have a different jar for each category. So I have a feathered one, and that's for the heating if we need to buy any more wood. I have an apple, which is for a food shop. But all of these are reused candle jars. And it was really nice over the last year and a bit, just every time I saw candles, I would just have a look at them and I'd try and find one that I like the smell of, but then I could reuse the jar. And candle jars are just one of those things that you can reuse for so many things. You could use them the way I use them, which is just for kind of sorting out your budget, or you can use them to hold pencils, or just because they're pretty jars and they're nice to look at. So candle jars are definitely one of the things that I reuse a lot. The last thing, and one thing that I haven't been able to get recently, are cider bottles. Not the normal cider bottles, but the rosy cider bottles that look like demi-johns. I love these because when you clean them, I've used them for making homemade apple cider vinegar, and they're really decent size. So if I want some apple cider vinegar to just ferment away, I can just, they're absolutely fantastic. I've done at least 2 batches of making my own homemade apple cider vinegar in that, but I also really like it for decorating. At the moment, the only thing that I've done with them is just taken all the coverings off, taken the little metal clasp off at the top, and then use them just like that for plants and for decoration in the living room or in the bedroom. But at some point soon, what I want to try and do is that you can try and cover, you can either try and paint the inside, so you can make it look like it's completely black by just putting black paint in the inside, and that looks awesome. You would need to put dried flowers in it. You wouldn't necessarily be able to put water in it because it will start to wear out the paint. But one of the things I want to do is you can get a kind of a cement, but it sticks very well to glass. So if I want to do that, what I can do is I can paint half of the bottle with this cement, but then I can start trying to create these patterns on the cement. So if I want to do these kind of Celtic knots or a pattern on it, I can make some really beautiful home decorations just with something that would otherwise get chucked in the bin. So, and I love the look of those demi-johns. I think they look so beautiful. There's so many different ways to decorate it. So those are one of the things that every time we do get a lovely bottle of cider, we get to enjoy the cider and I get to make something new out of it. So those are my favourite upcycles. It's not necessarily going to be 10, but I didn't want to just force myself into making 10 things unless there were 10 things that I could think of. I'm probably going to have a lot more over the next few months because I have a lot of projects, as usual, planned. But for the moment, those are my favourite 10 projects. I hope you liked the video, and I'll have a new one for you soon. If you like my content and want to follow me on Patreon, that's where you can find my early content, extra content, and see the thought process behind things like my books, cover designs, videos, and artwork. You can also find me on Instagram, but the best place to follow me and make sure that all my new content is sent directly to you is through my website and the mailing list. On the top right-hand corner, you put your name, the email you want your new content to be sent to, and that's it. You're done.